Okay, so today we're going to talk about annotations. I've titled this board Annotate That because a lot of times in English class we're going to read something and I am going to throw my hand up and say, oh, and I want you to annotate this. And there's going to be a collective groan from the class because I think students get really frustrated with A, what annotations are, and then B, what a teacher wants them to do with it, okay? So we're going to talk about the purpose, but at its core, annotations are just how to interact with the text. So if you're interacting with a person, you're reading that person's body language, you were trying to figure out, based on their accent, maybe where they're from, you're looking at their clothes and the way that they use their hands when they talk, right? That's an interaction, and that's exactly what I want you to do when you're annotating a text. But since it's not a purpose or a person, we're going to have to sort of talk about how to do that. Okay, so the purpose of annotations are so that you are understanding the text, plain and simple. I don't want you to get through something, whether it's, one paragraph or 30 pages, and say, I have no idea what was happening, or I can't remember anything I read. And so our second purpose is to track changes or progression in a text, okay? So if you're reading something and you feel like something is happening, the author is changing a character's motive, maybe there's a new point in this research paper that we're reading, or if we're reading an article, maybe there's a new statistic that we need to take note of. That's going to be something that sort of changes the direction of the text, just like a conversation. When you're talking to someone, maybe they start going in a different direction. You can tell that when you're listening to them. But in writing, a lot of times we forget to track those changes, okay? So if we are understanding the text, we know what the purpose is, we're tracking the changes or progressions, then we'll be able to also understand what we do know and what we don't know. So we'll be able to identify areas of interest or concern. If there's a word we don't know, if there's a topic or a reference that we want to know more about, that's something we need to mark in the text so that we can go back to those things when we're finished reading. Okay, so there's a lot of different purposes to annotation, but at the core, it all goes back to interacting with that text and making sure we understand what's happening. All right, so there's a few different ways that you can annotate. One way is I'll usually say, here are the things I want you to do today. Circle or underline your main ideas, so just the main points that are being proven. Character or people names, that seems silly because we're usually pretty good with names, but sometimes location names will slip in there, or somebody's last name will be used in one paragraph when their first name was used in a different one, and students get those names mixed up. If you circle them or highlight them, we'll be able to understand a little better where those names pop up in the text. Vocab words. These could be things that you just really like. Some words are really cool sounding. Don't make fun of me because I'm a nerd. But also, sometimes there's words we don't know, and those words are imperative for us to understand the text. So we need to highlight, circle, underline, and do something so that we can go back in and look up the definition. And then we can also circle or underline important ideas or events, okay? So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with tracking the changes or progression in a text. So the reason I said circle or underline, or you'll notice that I've said highlight, is that I can't tell you what's going to be best for you. You are going to be able to look at a paper and say, this is how it makes sense to me. For me, I like to underline and I like to highlight. Those are the two things that I do most. So you can kind of see I've given some examples. You may like squiggly lines, you may like circles, straight lines are fine, or you may like to box in your ideas. Okay, so when we're looking at a text, get that out of the way. I've sort of drawn out maybe a page of an article or a book, something we'd be looking at. You're going to circle or underline things, but I also want you to take notes in the margins, which I understand sounds like a lot, but this is English class. And again, if you're really interacting with something, you're going to do the most you can with it. So if we've got a text like this, one of the first things we may want to do as humans is react, okay? So are you surprised, confused, happy, sad? You can write those things down in the margins, or use your emoticons, use some sort of mark, like a happy face, sad face, exclamation points, question marks, to remind you, I got confused here, I don't know what this is, right? Or I can't believe he said that to her, and put an exclamation point. That way, when we're talking about things in class, you'll be able to sort of glance back over the page and immediately pick up where you had that reaction. Another piece you may want to do with a bracket is to locate important passages. Okay, so if there is a character monologue or speech that you feel like is really significant and we want to talk about it, put it in a bracket. Don't just say, oh, I'll remember it's on page 47, because you won't, right? Go ahead and mark it so that when you're flipping back through, that's something that you'll see. You also may want to jot a note down, like the author wants us to know X, Y, and Z. If it's an article about population growth and there's a cause, like one underlying cause that the author really is focused on, you may want to note that out in the margin just so that if you get to talking about it with someone, you can easily go back in and find that quote or passage. And then over here, I just wrote margin madness, okay? I write all over the margins in my books that are mine, not the school's, but you can do it on Post-it notes, and really what you're doing is you're figuring out how you feel and how you think about whatever this author has said. Okay, so that might be making a connection. Something that the author said makes you think of something else. You may want to track themes or character changes, so if there's a lesson that you feel like the author is trying to tell us, go ahead and jot that down. I think the author is saying that love conquers all, right? You may want to ask questions like, I don't understand why he doesn't use this statistic to prove that population growth is a problem. Or I don't understand why this character doesn't like this one anymore. Those weren't questions, but you could frame them that way. And then give an opinion. If it's a research article, you may not agree with what that person is saying. Go ahead and write these things down in your margins so that if I ask you to do some sort of writing, which I probably will, you've done all of the hard work already and it's in the text, and with your circles and your underlines and your boxes, all the things that you're doing while reading, you've already front-loaded all of the hard work for whatever we're doing with this text.